Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining us. I have William Stilley. He goes by Bill, CEO of Adial Pharmaceuticals, on the show with me today. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You're addressing a universal problem that's global in scope. So please tell us about alcohol addiction and the scope of the problem.
Well, I mean, as far as the scope of the problem, it's actually one of the largest disease states in the world, and then in the United States. In the United States alone, over 35 million people are estimated to have alcohol use disorder. It causes over 200 diseases. Just in the past few weeks, The Lancet published an article saying that alcohol is the leading killer of people in the United States ages 15 to 49. And, you think about it, there's childhood diseases, there's diseases as you age. 15 to 49 is when you're really not supposed to be having problems, and alcohol is killing really anyone. And it's across socioeconomic strata, race, sex, it doesn't matter. It's going after everybody. Go ahead. I was saying Adial Pharmaceuticals is really targeting that as our first indication as we go after, as a whole, the addiction space.
So I'd like to understand what Adial is doing in order to address the issues as a company, and relative to, in the landscape of things, what anybody else in your space would be doing that separates you from this alcohol addiction issue that we've got on a global scale.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have the addiction space in general, and there's a number of companies trying to work on this, and we think that is terrific. It's getting the visibility now of what a massive problem it is. And so this is good for, first of all, the patients, and then secondly, any of the companies in the space. Now, as far as alcohol use disorder, it's really one of the overlooked areas. And, part of that comes from the fact that for the past 80 years, there have really been no breakthroughs. This is such a big problem that the United States amended the Constitution to try to fix it. That's prohibition. And once prohibition ended, AA came out as one treatment paradigm, and really there's been no breakthrough since then. So what Adial Pharmaceuticals is doing is really leading the charge, and it's a confluence of events that allowed us to do this. It's an understanding of a lot that goes on in the brain. It's the unlocking of the genome that allowed us to genetically target the patients that we're going to treat. So for those that don't know, Adial Pharmaceuticals has a genetically targeted drug going after alcohol use disorder. So if you have the right genetics, our drug will be expected to help you reduce your drinking, and we believe that seems to be through reduction of craving for the alcohol. And so when you say what makes us different from the competitors or other people working in the space, first of all, we're targeting alcohol use disorder, where a number of them are focusing first on opioids or something else, which are much smaller markets, but at the moment you have a lot better visibility. Secondly, we have the genetic targeting, which now allows us, we believe, to make effective treatments, because we don't see this as one disease, but a multitude of diseases that have different presentations, and think it's really scientifically unsound to treat everybody the same way. So we are going to take this group of patients, treat them. And then finally, if you look at the world right now, there are no drugs in phase 3 trial for alcohol use disorder. When we dose our first patient at the beginning of next year, Adial Pharmaceuticals will be the only drug in the world in phase 3 trials. And so really, there is no competition, is the actual answer when you talk about alcohol use disorder.
That's a good answer. Okay. Specifically, how does the drug work?
So it's a serotonin 3 blocker, and it works by upstream of dopamine, inhibiting the release of dopamine that is generated by patients by the serotonin in these patients. And so through that, you inhibit the reward that's driven through dopamine and the craving that also comes through that system.
You can save a lot of lives with that. I get that. All right. How does someone get tested for a generic predisposition, and how can they get involved in your clinical trial?
Well, the first thing to get involved is, to be informed. In order to understand and be able to help, you have to have some knowledge. So I'd say an easy way to do that is to go to our website, which is www.adialpharma.com. And on the investor tab, you can sign up for our emails. You can go to, sign up to be on our Twitter feed. and also, LinkedIn or Facebook. And so, we will be trying to help educate the market, and that's a great place for somebody to start. Secondly, you asked the question about how do you get tested or to know about the genetic predisposition.
Right.
That test is not currently on the market. We are developing that as a companion diagnostic to go along with our drug called AD04. And that will be on the market at the time, it'll be released at the same time that drug comes on. There's not a particularly technological advancement in that test, and that we're using standard and well-characterized testing technology, but it's knowing at which genes to look, which is what really was the breakthrough for us. So you'll get tested, find out if you're positive against our panel of genetics, and if you are, then the drug will be expected to work.
Now, it's hard to nail this next question down, but I'm going to preface it by saying that. But in your opinion, how big is the problem? When you talk about population, percentages of populations, and I know from, Poland is a little different than California, but in your opinion, what percentage of the population is affected by this alcohol addiction that they can find out later through the test is they're predisposed to be alcoholics? How big is the real problem?
Well, so the problem, like I said, it's so big we amended the Constitution, over 100 million people in the world. It's estimated, and by the way, this is the CDC has estimated it, the NIAAA has estimated it, the World Health Organization has estimated it, and it's really, in the United States, about 13% of the adult population. So a massive problem. And in parts of Europe, as you mentioned, it's worse. Now, when you talk about our genetics, when you think about somebody with an alcohol problem, there are a lot of presentations. And just think about, for instance, patterns of drinking. So some people that have an alcohol problem, they get up in the morning, they're just not right till they have that first drink. And then they drink at low levels all day. Then there are some people, they can go years, literally years without a drink. They have that one drink, and then they go, on a bender, and sometimes the bender is a day, sometimes the bender is 6 months. And so to say that those people are exactly the same is, maybe unusual. And we know for a fact that different people handle alcohol differently, and that's genetically driven. In Asia, they have something called the Asian flush. A not insignificant amount of the population has this, and what happens? You drink the alcohol. These people, a small amount of alcohol, it makes them vasodilate. They get flushed. They feel like they're going through a menopausal hot flash. It's not particularly comfortable. And there are others that don't have that. And so we know that there's a difference in how alcohol is handled. So what we've identified is a set of patients, which in the United States appears to be about a third of the population, that has genetics which makes them susceptible to treatment by a 5-HT3 blocker, our drug AD04.
Right.
Now, and so in the United States, that's about a third. And I'll say, based on the publicly available databases, it appears that this prevalence is not uniform across the world. In Asia, Africa, in Africa, South America, North America, it seems to be fairly similar, Western Europe. But actually in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia in particular, it seems to have a higher prevalence based on the publicly available databases. So, our drug would be expected to be able to treat more people in, let's say, Sweden or Poland or Ukraine than other places. And, also mentioned that in Japan, it seems that our genetics have a lower prevalence. So what's going on with the alcohol to drive the drinking problems they have there might be a slightly different mechanism than what's happening in, let's say, Sweden.
Okay, but what I'm getting from you is that your drug, once you get through the next trials and you actually get to work with humans on this next phase, your drug is a universal inhibitor to the dopamine that comes out of our system that when we consume alcohol. It's not only for certain sectors of people that are predisposed to be alcoholics. It sounds to me like it's a universal drug. Am I correct in assuming that?
Well, it's so in these patients with these genetics, what it appears is that they have a defect in their serotonin system that through the activation of the 5-HT3 receptor, which is the serotonin 3 receptor, they have an over response which drives the craving and thus the consumption. So if you did not have that genetic difficulty, then our drug would not be expected to have a particularly strong effect in inhibiting your craving. And so I would say our drug is not to be, when we go out, we've already had the discussions with the FDA. We are going to have a restricted label. We're going to run our test in just the patients with those genotypes because we've already done the test in the what they call the general population and really identified this segment. So our label will be the use in patients of these genotypes for alcohol use disorder, which means you'll get a genetic test. If you're positive, you'll get our drug. If you're not positive, you will not get our drug. And it would be unlikely that the insurance companies would reimburse it if you're not positive. By the way, if you talk about that 1/3 of the population, I mean, that's still a pretty big number. And if you look at what the possibilities of a market for a drug like this are, it's well over $30 billion.
Absolutely. Assuming you're successful in your trial.
Correct. We have to be successful in the trials.
What's next? What will you do, or what do you think the solution will be? When do you think the solution will be available?
So we're going to have data in the first phase 3 trial in about 2 years, and we would expect to be on the market in approximately 5 years.
Good time frame. Good time frame. You're addressing only alcohol addiction. How do you want to characterize the company overall for the long term?
Well, as I've said, you said you watched my speech at the NASDAQ. Adial Pharmaceuticals is going after addiction. We have some of the world's leaders in the field involved in the company, and we are looking to expand our portfolio as we move forward, in a rational manner. But I think that, we think this is an unmet medical need and that we have the expertise to really take it on.
So it could blend out over to other forms of addiction, other forms of, whether it's not just alcohol, but it could be drug addiction is what I'm getting from that. Is that correct?
So ADO4 itself, we believe, could be usable in other addictions. And, I'll say we are exploring that. And just this morning, I was working with some of my companions and colleagues to try to determine how we are going to do that as rapidly as possible. So we think that is a way we can go. We are also looking at other ways that we might help in the addiction space.
Got it. Bill, thanks for being a guest on the show, and thank you for what you're doing for our global humanitarian push to really get a grip on this problem that's so pervasive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, you've been watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Don't forget, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.